2007, the
2007 set
legislature
it up.
created a broadband task force. There were a mix of appointees appointed by the Speaker of the House and the Senate President from both public and private sector. So we had heavy hitters, the phone company, the cable company, Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs was represented from the administration, federal reps. We had a wireless company on for a while. So, and 6 legislators were members, including yourself, as you know. And we really started at ground zero to ask ourselves, does this matter? Do we have a problem here? What should we do about it? And what I found most interesting and really heartening was the task force members did not start out at any common level of understanding. But by the end, and we worked really, it was a little more than a year, less than a year and a half certainly, we got quite far together as a group with very little disagreement and coming to pretty good consensus. And maybe just to quickly summarize, I think everybody by the end, actually within the first months, decided that broadband is really critical infrastructure for Hawaii's future. It's important to education, it's important to our future healthcare, it's important to our economic development. One study indicated that there's as much as $500 million per year improvement in potential economic development if we advance our broadband capability within this state alone. So it's important. We also found that we're lagging in Hawaii, not so much between the states, but as a nation, that as we look at economic competition in places like Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, and also in Europe, this is going to be a real challenge for us. It's as if we didn't have a road system in the last century. This is very likely the equivalent in this century of the importance of critical infrastructure. And then we came up with a set of recommendations about what we should do about it.
And one of those affected Larry's organization to make a communications commission, if you will.
Right.
You want to give us an idea of what that was going to look like that never did get through the legislature?
Sure. I looked at it as the centerpiece because I suppose this is what DCCA does. We're involved in regulation and consumer protection. On the regulation side, one of the areas we regulate, we have a cable television division. And so that's responsible for, here on Oahu as well as the neighbor islands right now, we have Oceanic as the franchisee. And they provide cable television services. To the extent we can, permitted by federal law, we regulate that. So that's a big part of the broadband equation because they're a big broadband provider. You can't regulate broadband directly, but you can still regulate their providers if they're providing other services. So DCCA regulates Oceanic on the cable side. However, the other big provider of broadband services is Hawaiian Telcom. They're regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, which is under the Department of Budget and Finance. So you have the 2 big broadband providers regulated in 2 different places within the state. There's no consistency in terms of the rules they face, the operational restrictions that are in place with regard to the 2. It's not even equal when you go to the federal level at the FCC for that matter. So we thought it really critical to bring those 2 groups under one tent somewhere. And the task force recommended, and I know the administration concurred in the bill that was proposed, called for the creation of a Hawaii Communications Commission attached to the DCCA, which would regulate both telephone and cable.
And I understand that would have been done without any extra cost whatsoever, just basically putting an umbrella over 2 existing organizational structures.
That's right.
But when you say, well, we are the regulators, DCCA, could you have then, or in any capacity said, okay, we want you guys to be faster? Or you don't have that much regulation.
Exactly. And that's the issue that I was addressing when I said to the extent that the feds allow it, because broadband is essentially excluded from regulation. The FCC and the federal government dictates how much authority the states have, and as to broadband, it's not a service that the states are able to regulate itself. Consequently, while we're able to regulate the providers in terms of when they provide cable services or when they provide telephone services, we cannot regulate their provision of broadband services. So for instance, DCCA, even with regard to cable, doesn't have the ability to regulate rates for anything other than the most basic tier where only 10% of the folks are involved. So there's very little rate regulation that goes on in any of these areas. And in broadband, there's no direct regulation because the feds have excluded us.
So, David, how are these other countries doing it? If you know, the biggest economy and the strongest power in the world can't do it, how are they doing it? Are they putting a lot of government money into it, or
I mean, there's really
we're kind of taking
two
hands
strategies that, and I haven't done a very careful analysis of this, but two strategies seem common. One of them is sharing of infrastructure. So, for example, if you drive down Beretania Avenue, you will probably see fiber installed by the cable company. You'll see fiber installed by the phone company. You may see fiber installed by one or two other competitive providers, all of whom have done that at their own expense, but they are all then recovering the cost of this duplicate infrastructure.
So they're all wired side by side.
They're all side by side. Yeah.
So
we're not sharing that kind of infrastructure very effectively. And this is at multiple levels. There were, without going into too much detail. So that's a key element that lots of other countries have managed to do differently, is they have regulated not the services necessarily, but they force these providers to find ways to share infrastructure. And there are varieties of different models, but as a theme, you can think about it as a way to reduce costs to the providers, who then can provide services to the public at with lower prices. So it's driving the economics in that direction. The second thing is exactly what you said. There are many countries that think it's perfectly appropriate to invest public money in critical infrastructure for the 21st century. We've done that. We do that in this country with roads. We do it with water. We do it with power, highly regulated. So there are lots of models of how you deploy critical infrastructure, not so much power, I guess, but other kinds of infrastructure the government does or regulates heavily. And we have made a decision in this country to stay fairly hands-off in broadband, and other countries, Australia is making about a $43 billion investment in deploying next generation fiber infrastructure and wireless infrastructure to take their whole country to leapfrog where we are today. That's the kind of thing that's common in other places. New Zealand's doing something similar. Singapore's doing something similar. So I think our country and or our state, there's no recipe, but I think there are some ingredients that you can put together in different ways to achieve our public policy objectives. Right now, neither the nation nor the state even has a vision to say we want every home to have access to 100 megabit per second services at affordable prices.